Part 5, Chapter 9. The Kids with Tommy Guns. The camps were guarded by men in great coats with black cuffs. They were guarded by Red Army men. They were guarded by prisoner guards. They were guarded by elderly reservists. Last came the robust youngsters born during the first 5-year plan, who had seen no war service when they took their nice new Tommy guns and set about guarding us. Twice every day, for an hour at a time, we and they shuffled along, tied together in silent and deadly brotherhood. Any one of them was at liberty to kill any one of us. We walked with never a glance at their sheepskin coats and their Tommy guns. What were they to us? They walked watching our dark ranks all the time. It was there in the regulations that they must watch us all the time. Orders were orders. Duty was duty. Any wrong movement, any false step, they must cut short with a bullet. How did they think of us in our dark jackets, our gray caps of Stalin fur, our grotesque felt boots that had served 3 sentences and shed 4 souls, our crazy quilt of number patches? Decent people would obviously never be treated like that. Was it surprising that our appearance inspired disgust? It was intended to do just that. These kids were not allowed to know anything about us. They were allowed only the right to shoot without warning. If they had just visited us in our huts of an evening, sat on our bunks and heard why this old man, or the old fellow over there, was inside, those towers would have been unmanned, and those Tommy guns would never have been fired. But the whole cunning and strength of the system was in the fact that our deadly bond was forged from ignorance. Any sympathy they showed for us was punishable as treason. Any wish to speak to us as a breach of a solemn oath. And what was the point of talking to us when the political instructor would come at fixed intervals to lead a discussion on the political and moral character of the enemies of the people whom they were guarding? The political instructor will never contradict himself, never make a slip. He will never tell the boys that some people are in prison here simply for believing in God, or simply for desiring truth, or simply for love of justice, or indeed for nothing at all. Here is one such political lesson, as remembered by a former convoy guard at Neroblag. Lieutenant Samutin was a lanky, narrow-shouldered man, and his head was flat above the temples. He looked like a snake. He was tow-headed and almost without eyebrows. We knew that in the past he had shot people with his own hands. Now he was a political instructor, reciting in a monotonous voice, "The enemies of the people, over whom you stand guard, are the same as the fascists, filthy scum. We embody the power and the punitive sword of the motherland, and we must be firm. No sentimentality, no pity." This is how they mold the boys who make a point of kicking a runaway's head when he is down. The boys who can boot a piece of bread out of the mouth of a gray-haired old man in handcuffs, who can look with indifference at a shackled runaway jounced on the splintery boards of a lorry. His face is bloodied, his head is battered. But they look on unmoved, for they are the motherland's punitive sword, and he, so they say, is an American colonel. After Stalin's death, then living in internal banishment, I was a patient in an ordinary free Tashkent clinic. Suddenly I heard a patient, a young Uzbek, telling his neighbors about his service in the army. His unit had, he said, kept guard on beasts and butchers. It enraged them that they, the convoy guards, had to freeze on top of watchtowers in the winter, in sheepskin coats down to their heels, it's true, while the enemies of the people, once they entered the working area, scattered about the warming-up shacks. Even from the watchtower he could have seen that it was not so, and slept there all day. Here was an interesting opportunity. To look at a special camp through the eyes of a convoy guard. I began asking what kind of reptiles they were and whether my Uzbek friend had talked to them personally. And of course he told me that he had learned all this from political officers, that they had even had cases read out to them in their political indoctrination sessions, and his malicious misconceptions about prisoners sleeping all day had, of course, been reinforced in him by the approving nods of officers. Woe unto you that caused these little ones to stumble. Better for you had you never been born. He told us of a number of incidents. Once, for instance, one of his comrades was marching in convoy and fancied that somebody was about to run out of the column. He pressed his trigger and killed 5 prisoners with a single burst. Since all the other guards later testified that the column had been moving quietly along, this soldier incurred a terrible punishment. For killing 5 people, he was put in detention for 15 days. In a warm guardhouse, of course. But which of the archipelago's inhabitants has no stories of this sort to tell? We knew so many of them in the corrective labor camps. On a work site which has no fence but an invisible boundary line, a shot rang out and a prisoner fell. Why? Because the man has a gun. Because one man has the arbitrary power to kill or not to kill another. What's more, it pays. The bosses are always on your side. They'll never punish you for killing somebody. On the contrary, they'll commend you, reward you, and the quicker you are on the trigger, bring him down when he's only put half a foot wrong, the more vigilant you are seen to be, the higher the reward. A month's pay, a month's leave. Yes, but their underlying common humanity must have been weak, or altogether lacking, if it was not proof against an oath and a few political discussion periods. Not every generation, and not every people, is of the stuff from which such boys are fashioned. This is surely the main problem of the 20th century. Is it permissible merely to carry out orders and commit one's conscience to someone else's keeping? Can a man do without ideas of his own about good and evil, and merely derive them from the printed instructions and verbal orders of his superiors? Oaths. Those solemn pledges pronounced with a tremor in the voice and intended to defend the people against evildoers. See how easily they can be misdirected to the service of evildoers and against the people. End of Part 5, Chapter 9.